Good evening and welcome. My name is Hank Clark. I'm program coordinator of the Political Economy Project here at Dartmouth College. If you're not on our email list but would like to be, please feel free to stop down after the talk and I'll put you on the list. We have one more public event in the winter term, and that's next Tuesday, the 18th of February. Joseph Smith of Boston University will be here to talk about what do we actually know about China today? What do we actually know about the political economy of China? That will be Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Check our website. Keep a lookout for alerts, and you're all welcome to attend that one as well. But for today's event, we have again Professor Meir Kohn. Some of you have seen some of the earlier entries in this remarkable lecture series that Professor Kohn has been giving us this year. It's a series of 6 lectures under the general rubric, Understanding the Economy. Today is lecture 4, Why There's No Such Thing as Market Failure. It will be the last lecture of the winter term. There will be 2 more in the spring term. Those of you who missed some of the earlier talks can find them on our webpage on YouTube under the news and events section, past events. And I certainly encourage you to do that because it's been quite a run. And we're honored to have Professor Kohn with us again. As you all know, he's professor of economics here at Dartmouth College, where he's taught for many years. He knows about as much about the history of global economics as anyone that I know. And so without any further ado, won't you please join me in welcoming Meir Kohn.
Thank you, Hank, for organizing all this, and to the PEP for sponsoring it, and to George Records in particular for the support he provides to the PEP. Okay. The standard justification for government intervention in the economy is market failure. This talk is about the concept or idea of market failure, not about whether government intervention is justified. As many of you know, I'm not a big fan, but we will get to this actually towards the end. We'll talk a little bit about that because there are implications of what we're doing for that question. We will see that market failure is a property of a mathematical model of the economy, and I will argue that market failure is not a property of the real world. Okay, and if it's not a property of the real world, it can't be a valid argument for government intervention in the real world. Okay, it works for the model, but not for the real world. In general, a model is that all models are analogs of the reality they represent, not a detailed description. Some of the properties of a model correspond to reality. Those are important for what the model is used for. Other properties don't. Okay, they're usually the result of simplification to focus on the particular subject that the model is designed to shed light on. So using a model to understand reality requires care. Okay, you have to be careful. And getting it wrong is known as mistaking the map for the territory. Okay, that's sort of, I'll repeat that expression a few times in the course of the talk. So just to illustrate that a little bit, I grew up in England in the 1950s. I was a kid. I learned about the British Empire at school, and we looked at a map of the world with the empire colored in pink. Okay, so you could learn a lot from the map. For example, that the empire was a large part of the world, but not that Australia, Ghana, and Malaya were pink. Okay, that was not a deduction from the map that was valid. A less silly example, okay, the Mercator projection badly distorts size, and it makes Greenland look larger than Africa. Africa is actually 14 times the size of Greenland. So the Mercator projection is good for some things. It gives directions, north, south, east, west, accurately. It shows you the shape of various continents and countries, but it's not good for size or for distance. It's very misleading about those. And using that map, you have to know these things, what is good for and what it isn't good for. Okay, to understand the mathematical model of an economy that is the basis for market failure, for the concept of market failure, we're going to start with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Hank will agree this is always a good place to start. So Smith's big idea was that the productivity of human society was not a result of how smart or skillful we are as individuals, but how we work together, the social organization of production. Okay, that's sort of the key. The framework in which this happens is the market. Because the market exists, rather than each of us producing whatever we need for ourselves, we can produce for sale and use the proceeds to buy whatever we need. Okay, that's the way things work in a market economy. The consequences Smith talked about were division of labor and specialization, the development of skills, and the use of technology. All of this hugely increases productivity. That's the origin of the wealth of nations. Okay, the bigger the market, the better this works. Okay, so, in what was really an aside to Smith, it just kind of interested him a little bit, and he talked about it, but wasn't central to the arguments of the book. He noted that the social organization requires coordination. Okay, everyone's doing different things. It needs somehow to be coordinated. And he explored the role of market prices in providing that coordination, providing incentives, indications that guide what people do, how they specialize, and so on, okay? So today's textbook economics focuses on that idea, which was not central. They don't worry about the wealth of nations much, but they do worry about the role of prices in coordination. And to clarify how it works, economists built a mathematical model of the economy. And the model focuses on one aspect of coordination. There are a lot more, but that's what it focuses on, and that's the allocation of resources. Okay. So, according to standard economics, a well-functioning economy allocates resources well to the most productive uses. Okay. And that matters because if resources are allocated to not very productive uses, it's a waste, and the economy won't be as productive as it could be. Okay. And prices promote this because the people with the most productive uses are the ones who are willing to pay most for the resources. Okay, so they bid away the resources from those that don't have a good use for them. And compared to Smith, the model offers some clarification of these issues. So it's not completely useless. But then textbook economics jumps the shark. Okay. And it asks under what conditions the economy, the market, the economy coordinated in this way by prices achieves the highest possible productivity. Okay, we'll see that's not a sensible question to ask, but in the model, actually, it is sensible. So when the economy reaches its highest possible productivity, That's called efficiency or optimality. And that is what, the term isn't used much, but you could call that market success. If the market achieves that, that's market success. When the conditions under which this happens are not satisfied, productivity is not as great as possible. Okay? We don't achieve optimality or efficiency, and that is described as market failure. Okay? I don't know why the market is blamed, but it's a situation in which we don't get the most productive use of resources, and that's what's called market failure. All this makes sense in the world, and does it make sense? All this makes sense in the model. Does it make sense in the real world? Okay, is there something corresponding to this in the real world? To answer this, we need to understand how the model differs from the real world. Okay, the map from the territory. Okay, so the model makes several simplifying assumptions. Okay, and this is helpful or even essential if you're going to build a model. You can't have it be a literal description. It's just unwieldy, useless. So we want to simplify it to focus on the things that matter to us, okay, which is, in this case, what affects prices, how are prices formed, and what effect do prices have. This used to be called price theory rather than economics before it took over the discipline. So there are three important assumptions that are perfectly sensible and harmless for that purpose, but we'll see they kind of mess things up if you're going to ask other questions. So the first assumption is about individual behavior. How do people behave? So individuals in this economy, model economy, whether they're producers or household consumers, they are essentially pretty passive. They receive the list of prices from the market, and they make their decisions about what to produce, how to produce, what to consume based on those prices. That's it. Okay, so they also presumably consume and produce, but we don't sort of go into that. So that's individual behavior. About the economy. Because individuals are doing the best they can given the prices, there's no reason to change their behavior. Okay, so the market is the economy is static in an equilibrium. Okay? We have the right prices. Assuming we have the right prices that clear all the markets, then the economy doesn't change. There's no reason for anyone to change what they're doing. They're doing the best now. Why would they change? Okay. The third assumption is about the market, what it is. So, and this isn't really an assumption, but this is sort of implicit. The market is a disembodied spirit that costlessly provides the right prices. In fact, what I'm really saying is there's absolutely no discussion of what the market is or how it sets prices. Okay, it just happens by magic. That's the market. We'll run into another disembodied spirit a little later. So these simplifying assumptions are not intended to be realistic. They're there to facilitate the study of the role of prices. And if we're studying that, they're perfectly fine. Okay, they don't do any harm. However, today, many economists have forgotten this and think of the model as actually describing the economy. Okay, I had a colleague when I taught in Israel who told me that he'd asked the student to draw a firm on the blackboard. And those of you who've taken economics will understand this. He drew, axes and cost curves of, different kinds. And my friend said to the student, no, let me show you. And he erased that, and he drew on the backboard a factory, a building with a big smokestack, and he said, that's a firm. It doesn't look like the thing that you drew, okay? But economists kind of slipped into very easily thinking of this as being the economy. Okay, most economists don't actually study the real economy. What is called today empirical economics is working with data derived from the economy. But I have a colleague, David Blanchflower, who says, he agrees with me that they should get out more, and he calls what they should be doing is the economics of walking about, okay, going and having a look. But they don't. This is what they consider the economy to be. All right. So what is missing? What is assumed away? So let's start off with the individual. So in the real world, individuals do a lot more than respond passively to given prices. And I'll just mention two important dimensions to this. The first one that we kind of mentioned when talking about Smith, and Smith was very big on this, is human beings are highly social. They interact with other human beings, okay? Some critics of sort of conventional economics have described it as autistic economics. There's no eye contact anyway. Okay, it's all without any actual interaction. In reality, a lot of the direct interaction between people is very important, and especially in coordinating the social organization of production. Okay, a lot of coordination is not through prices, it's through people telling other people or agreeing with other people what to do. And we kind of leave that out of the story. Individuals form enterprises, that's sort of what I had in mind. The actual firms, the one with the smokestack, okay? And they also form something else called an association, where they have a common interest or a common problem, and they get together to deal with that. Okay, it's not a firm, but it's a different kind of organization, but it's very important in the economy. There was an economist, Eleanor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, and this was her thing. She said there's, one of the market failures, for example, is something called the tragedy of the commons. Okay, ranchers share a range and they graze their cattle there, and they all have an interest essentially to use it as much as they can. And the result is overgrazing and destroying and da-da-da-da-da. But guess what happens? She went and had a look. She actually went and had a look. What happens? The ranchers get together and they agree on how much each person should, graze their cattle based on, I don't know, a bunch of different things. It works great, no problem, no tragedy. Okay. So that's just an example. All right, the second dimension that is missing from this description of individual behavior is it's represented as being purely calculating, okay? Whereas it isn't, okay? It's also entrepreneurial. Okay? It's not that people calculate exactly, what they should be doing or how they should be doing it. They look for opportunities. When they find them, they act on them. They find the financing, and they create SpaceX and other things. This is not unimportant in the economy. Okay. So I had an example written down here. Suppose the price of oil rises, oil producers, in the model would react by expanding production. Okay, some things that were at the margin that weren't worth doing, exploiting at the lower price now are, and they'll expand the drilling. But producers will also respond by figuring out fracking. Okay, totally different. Enormous effect on productivity. Okay, so ignoring this entrepreneurial behavior of individuals it's okay if all you're interested in is prices and how they affect things, but if you're interested more broadly in the economy, for example, how the economy deals with problems, you should not be ignoring this. Okay. All right. As a result of this, okay, the real world economy is not static or in equilibrium. It's constantly changing. People are finding new opportunities, new ideas. They're doing things differently. The economy changes, okay, generally raising productivity. And this creates new opportunities. And it goes on and on. It doesn't have an end, okay? So the economy is not an it's wrong to, if you're thinking about prices, okay, think of it as an equilibrium. No harm done. But if you're interested in other things, you have to think about it as a process. Okay, those of you who attended my talk on communism and capitalism, that was the big difference. Okay, in the market economy, there's this process which goes on and on raising productivity. In the communist economy, there isn't. Okay, there's some gain from larger scale social organization, but that's it. It doesn't go anywhere. All right. So the third difference, the third thing that doesn't correspond to reality and matters is in the model, we said the market is this disembodied spirit, okay? In the real world, it's not. You'll be surprised to hear a disembodied spirit. I mentioned it in a couple of my talks. The market is created and operated by an economic activity called commerce. Okay, people who facilitate exchange. That's sort of the fundamental economic function. Merchants, dealers, financial institutions. I gave a talk on finance. That was sort of an example of commerce. Okay. And it does a lot more. So it does set prices, but it does a lot more than that. Okay, and those other things that it does are very important when we come to talking about problems and dealing with them in the economy. Do these differences between the model and the real world matter? It depends on the questions that you ask the model. Okay, what you use the model for, as with a map. If the question is how prices affect the economy, what affects prices, perfectly adequate. Those assumptions do no harm. If the question is about market success or failure, those are concepts that make sense in the model but make no sense in the real world for reasons that we'll immediately explore. Okay, that's mistaking the map for the territory. Okay, let's look at market success first, because I think you need to know what that is before you talk about market failure. As I've said, in the model, coordination by prices leads to an allocation of resources that achieves the highest possible productivity. Okay? In the real world, there's no such thing as the highest possible productivity. That's the start. Okay? The potential is never fully realized because realizing potential creates more potential. It's a self-perpetuating process. In a market economy, productivity continues to rise. In addition, productivity doesn't depend only on, or even mainly on, the allocation of resources. That's just one factor, and generally not a terribly important one, shockingly, okay? So as an example, an illustration of this, is what are the gains from opening markets, expanding the market, opening to free trade? What does free trade do for you? And according to this model, okay, conventional economics, it allows for a more efficient allocation of resources. Okay, individual economies tend to specialize in things where they have a comparative advantage. won't go into all the story, but they're things that they naturally can do better and cheaper, okay? And this increases productivity, and that's the story, okay? There was an empirical study, a very good trade economist sort of looked into this. What could he see empirically? And he was surprised and disappointed to find that this wasn't a big deal. I mean, yeah, it's true it happened, but this wasn't a huge change. Okay, so what was the effect of opening up? Okay, so most of the changes, most of the increase in productivity came from changes in the way the economy was organized and the technology that it was using. And the stimulus for this, largely, was the increased competition that opening markets created. Okay? Tal is nodding his head. We're doing a book on that subject at the moment in a reading group. So yeah, that's what drives it. It's the increasing competition. Why are people against opening of markets and free trade? Because they have sort of a bit of a monopoly in the domestic economy, and they don't want competition. That's the thing. Okay, so this is the big thing, and it doesn't make sense in the model. Okay, there's no room for that in the model, but in reality, it's very important. Okay, market failure. In the model, it's a situation under which coordination by prices is unable to produce the highest possible productivity. In the real world, highest possible productivity makes no sense. So failure to achieve it, market failure, makes no sense either. However, okay, let's be more generous. Even if literal market failure makes no sense in the real world, are the problems that cause market failure in the model actually problems in the real world? And if so, how are they dealt with? Okay. And does addressing them require government intervention? That's sort of the conclusion that is drawn. In the model, there's no other way of fixing things. Okay, so is that true in the real economy? And how does government do at that? So I'm just going to look at one problem. Okay, I'll mention some others, but one problem in the model is a cause of failure is imperfect information. Okay, in order to make the best decision, given prices, consumers, producers need all kinds of information about products, about quality, about reliability of people they're trading with, all these sorts of things. And if they don't have good information, there's no way they have no idea what is best. Okay. So lack of information is a real problem, okay, in the real world, and not just in the model. An example of that is if you want to make a loan, especially those who attended the first talk, okay, if you want to make a loan, especially to a stranger, you need good information about the stranger, how reliable he is, what he's going to do with the money, all these sorts of things. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense to make a loan. In the real world, finance, a branch of commerce, lecture 1, addresses these problems in various ways. And I don't want to go there. We went into it in sort of more detail, but here there's just one way, and it's called a bank. Okay. So rather than you having to solve all these information problems and others of lending to a stranger, you lend your money to a bank. And the bank takes your money together with the money of lots of other people and makes loans to people who are strangers to the depositors. Okay. And the bank is an expert at this information problem, addresses it very well and can deal with it. The bank is a solution for you because it's safe. You don't need any more. There's whatever information you need is readily available. that was true even before deposit insurance. It's not a function of deposit insurance. Banks are sort of, without deposit insurance, they work really hard to not only be safe, but appear to be safe. Okay, so people will trust them and make deposits. Okay, one of the things that helps is if they're bigger. Bigger banks are inherently safer than small banks. Okay, so in the model, this real-world solution is ruled out by assumption. We don't have commerce, we don't have financial intermediaries, any of that stuff that solves this problem. Okay, if you have a information problem with product quality, okay, it makes sense for producers to get together, set up a non-profit institution that will examine them and certify that these things have good quality. Okay, and they'll do a good job because otherwise it's worthless. Okay, so information problems are not insoluble in the real world, but the model sort of eliminates them by assumption. All right. Similarly, with other causes of market failure in the model, we talked a bit about the tragedy of the commons. Externalities is sort of the more general category of these things. Monopoly is a problem, is a cause of market failure in the model. What else did I have on my list? Public goods is a problem. Okay. All right. So the other thing is these problems may not be problems. Okay, so monopoly, for example, isn't good if it's just monopoly, but that's usually not true. It's usually we have something like someone has a fantastic new product or idea, grows rapidly, and has a monopoly in the market. Okay. It doesn't last. Okay, if we're in equilibrium, that would be a worry. If we're in a dynamic economy where people respond to opportunities, others see the ton of money this guy is making, and they would like a piece of that. And they find ways to compete, to create alternatives, all these sorts of things. So monopoly may actually be quite functional in a dynamic process like the one we're describing. Okay, you wouldn't want to mess with it. Okay. All right. So generally, the economy has ways of dealing with these problems, or they may not even be such big problems as they are in the model. So let me just conclude by sort of summarizing what I've said. Market failure is a property of a particular mathematical model of the economy. In the model, under some conditions, the market, coordination by prices, produces the highest possible productivity, efficiency, market success. If these conditions are not satisfied, productivity is not the highest possible. This is called market failure. The only way to achieve highest possible productivity is through intervention by the government. Okay, and you may ask in the model, what is government? Government is another disembodied spirit. And I think of it as a fairy godmother who magically fixes any problem that you might have. Okay, that's the model, government in the model. In the real world, no such thing as highest possible productivity, so market success and market failure don't really make sense. Nonetheless, the problems that cause market failure in model may be problems in the real world. But in the real world, there are ways to address these problems other than coordination by prices, such as action by commerce and joint action by participants in the economy. These are ruled out by assumption in the model. Moreover, in the real world, you'll be shocked to hear government is not a fairy godmother. Okay? And the empirical record of government attempts to correct market failures shows that they have generally been unsuccessful or even harmful. Okay? So using market failure in the model to justify government intervention in the real world is a misuse of the model, an example of mistaking the map for the territory. Okay, done.
Questions?
Russ has a question.
Classic case, I think, I only took 2 semesters of economics, so.
That's not bad.
I know, so I don't have to be uneducated as much as others. But as I remember, classic case of market failure, and you mentioned them,
Yeah.
externalities.
Yes.
And just take the case of, pollution. So you mentioned, let's draw a picture of the
Right.
firm, there's
Right.
a smokestack.
Right.
And that smoke that's coming out of the smokestack is imposing a cost.
Sure.
But the firm doesn't have to cover that cost.
No.
So the society has to cover that
Right.
cost. And that's why it's an externality, I guess. And,
Yeah.
and so the thought is that the fairy godmother government comes in
Right.
and figures out a way to
Right.
assign that cost to the firm so the firm has an incentive not to pollute as
Right.
much. I mean, is that like a
No,
reasonable story or not?
that is a reason. It's not, and I'm not suggesting that government can never do anything useful. In principle, at least, it's possible. And what you're talking about, governments were doing for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. So cities generally pushed all of these noxious activities into one area. They didn't let people do this all over the city. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense for people to get together to deal with this, and getting together may involve through a government, more naturally through a local government, but not inconceivable a national government might play a role in this. So yeah, there is some sort of case for it. Yeah, I don't have any problem. I'm not saying it's never possible for the government to do something useful about these problems.
Yeah.
I'm saying that usually it's not.
Ask a follow-up,
Yeah.
and a sympathetic one.
Yeah.
So my hunch is, I'm trying to unpack your thought here.
Yes.
My hunch is that you're saying that example I just gave is not an example of market failure. It's just an example of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about market. Yeah, we're talking. Well, we're talking about it's a market failure. It's the market prices won't solve this problem by themselves. Okay, if you impose fines on pollution, then that's a price, and that helps. But the market by itself won't. Market prices by themselves won't address this. But one of my points was that's not all the economy or the society has at its disposal to deal with problems. Yeah, there are other things. And the other thing also, again, with government, even when government can do something useful, it's better if they're not the ones doing it. Because anything they do badly. Okay, that's just, you're an expert on government, right? You wouldn't disagree with that. You don't get good service from that particular, don't have good incentives, right? So if it could be solved in another way, that's generally preferable. Okay, if not, then maybe this is the best alternative. Yeah. Yes, Ala.
Real world, you keep mentioning real world.
Yeah.
There are various causes that are not related actually to the product. For example, we were boycotting Soviet Union's product during the evil empire time, and we never bought Stanichna vodka.
Yeah.
Right now, all the do-gooders want you to buy something that makes from fully recycled product,
Right.
women-owned,
Yeah.
whatever. I really don't care, but they are pushing it,
Well,
and some people acting according.
That's perfectly fine that they're pushing it. It's free speech and all that kind of thing.
Right.
But then the question is it equally reasonable for the government to impose this by force? And there I beg to differ. Okay.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. But people can have those opinions. They can campaign for it. They can try and persuade other people. That's perfectly.
And that's a
legitimate.
factor in market success or failure.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So can all functions of the government, in your view, can be outsourced to private enterprises?
No.
And what are the examples that cannot be outsourced?
National defense. Okay, there's big there's advantages of scale in defense. Okay, that was why the United States was created. That was what the federal government was for. It wasn't to set up a Department of Education. It was to be responsible for defending all the states, okay? That if each of the states was separately responsible for that, that wouldn't work very well. Okay, that's sort of the classic thing that governments do. That's what they're created for the use of force. Okay, sometimes it's used for other things that are not so good, but it's an organization to deploy force. And the good kind is for the purpose of national defense. Okay. I think in one of my talks, predation trap talk, I talked about government and two types, associational and predatory government and stuff like that. If you want to, you can watch the video. Yes?
To what extent do you agree with Eleanor Ostrom's research, the article you mentioned?
Sorry?
To what extent do you agree with Eleanor Ostrom's research and the article you mentioned?
Yeah.
And do you see it as evidence against the existence of market failure, or more that it's not government intervention?
Well, no, I mean, it's not about the existence of market failure. The question is, can people and the economy deal with these problems without government intervention? And all of those things are evidence that they can. You know, it's just go out there and look, as Ellen Ostrom did. Yeah, that definitely works. So, you know, there's this argument that if the government doesn't do it, but that's not true in reality. Yes?
What about tariffs?
What about tariffs?
I have to just say, when I said I was coming to this talk tonight, my wife said, ask him about tariffs.
Well, I don't think, you know, other things equal, that they're good, but I think there are circumstances, for example, this is, I think Trump sort of, makes this clear. If other countries have tariffs on our goods, you impose tariffs in order to bargain for a removal of their tariffs, and then we can remove ours. So I can see circumstances in which they make sense. Okay, they're bad, but one of the things economists learn is that there are trade-offs. You know, one bad thing might mitigate another bad thing that's even worse. So you have to make your choices. Okay, you don't have a market's perfect success. You don't have perfection. Okay.
What about sanctions? For example, right now, sanctions on Russia.
We're straying from our subject. Yeah, that's government. That, again, is the same sort of thing. It's not good in and of itself, but there may be circumstances in which it's justified. Yeah. When it's the lesser of evils, right? That's my my voting plan. Is the lesser of evils. I vote. That's who I vote for. Yes.
So, Meir, since you mentioned Adam Smith, I'll just pick up on that thought a little bit. Because he sees three, as you probably remember, three essential functions of government.
Yes.
One you've already mentioned, national defense.
Yes.
The second one he mentions is a justice system. That would be courts, police, and so forth.
That actually, historically, is not accurate. It's not justified. That governments were actually, in Europe, okay, in China, they never had any kind of thing. I mean, never, till recently, or maybe not even now. Any kind of legal system that was worth anything. But in Europe, courts and laws were created by organized markets. The fairs of Champagne, Venice, Genoa, all these places. That's where law came from, commercial law came from. And later on, like in England, the government tried to imitate that and set up its own commercial courts. But that government wasn't necessary to do that. Commerce has a very clear interest in a court system, and if there isn't one, they'll create it. That's what happened. And in China, there wasn't commerce, and nobody created it, and the lack of it was an obstacle to commerce beginning there. Yeah, so that's not one. What else did Smith say?
Well, the third one
Yes.
in his category as a kind of vade-mecum. He says certain public works that are necessary for the public welfare that would not generally be
Done by the
produced
private sector.
by private
Yeah.
entities.
Conceivably, but again, if you look at the history of Europe, they were mainly done not by the ruler, but by cities. Okay, the fairs of Champagne had an interest in having good transportation to the fairs of Champagne, and where it was lacking, they did it, and that was true generally. So rulers weren't very good in infrastructure either. And if you look at the Industrial Revolution, there's a very good book on this, and it compares England and France. Why not France? Okay, so the thing in England that gave rise to the Industrial Revolution was the private creation of highways, the turnpike movement, okay, which were authorized by the government. So the government did play a minor role, but it was at the initiative of the private sector. And they improved transportation so much that the organization of production changed, and made sense to have factories rather than people working in their home. And when you have factories, it makes sense to have machinery. Industrial Revolution. In France, all of the highways were done by the government, the royal government, and all the highways radiated from Paris so that it would be convenient for the king to get wherever he wanted to go. In economic terms, this was not very helpful. So, give you an example. So, government infrastructure is not the best. It may be the only thing available, in which case, yeah, we'll take it, but, yeah. Okay. Yes?
Could the same argument be made for national defense then, that if it's in a commercial interest to keep the seas
The problem
open?
with national defense is the scale issue. Okay, generally the wars are won not by generals. Okay, I'm not that they don't matter. It's a big help to have a good general, but it's resources. The side with the most resources generally wins, because you can outlast. You can take lose a few battles and still win if you have enough resources. Okay, so the more resources you have, the more likely you are to win. And smaller units are at a disadvantage. Okay, so I think I talked about it in the Federation talk. Associational governments of cities were at a disadvantage. So they tried to get bigger. Okay, they became city-states. Okay, as they got bigger, government deteriorated, and they became more predatory and looked bad. And then in the Netherlands, by accident, they kind of stumbled on federal government, which proved to be a solution. You could have large scale, but still have most of the government small. And that's what we have, and it's deteriorated a lot. Was there a republic if you can keep it? We've kept it for over 200 years, right? Yeah, I think so. But a bit shaky. Yes, Aaron.
So in the case of rival infrastructure, so let's say someone builds a road to my house, right?
Yes.
And let's say they jack up the prices $500 to $500 each day. There's physically not a way to build another road to my house.
Right.
Is
Why
there?
would anyone build a road to your house?
Let's say they're building they build the entire, entire apartment
Development.
complex, right? Development, something.
Okay.
Is there a
But
case
why
for
would they
government-
want to charge a high turnpike? They're selling houses. Would that
Yeah,
attract,
maybe
attract
they-
business?
Yeah, maybe let's say they sell it and then after 10 years they go, okay.
Don't believe it. Sorry.
We're around the corner.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
You're out of my line of sight.
yes, you mentioned how public goods are one of the causes for market
Yes.
failure. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, a public good is something that is non-rival. So I can enjoy it, you can enjoy it, and doesn't mean we can both enjoy it, doesn't increase the cost. If it exists, any number, national defense is an example of a public good. And what's the other?
Clean air.
Sorry?
Clean air.
No. What's another quality? Not excludable. Yeah, it's hard to exclude people. You can't say you didn't pay your taxes, so we'll let the enemy get you. That's not practical. Okay, so non-excludable and non-rival, that's the definition of a public good. And to show how this can be misused, the argument is made that sort of science is a public good, right? Knowledge is sort of a public good, okay? You could exclude, but you wouldn't want to because thing is certainly non-rival. And therefore, the government should be funding science because the private economy won't invest enough in scientific research. That has been a disaster. That didn't happen before World War II. Science was really good before World War II. Since then, the government has increasingly been funding science, and the results have been really very bad. We don't have time to go into all of it. But so what I was saying before, sometimes the government can, in principle, do something useful, but experience shows that it doesn't usually turn out very well. Yes?
Maybe going off of the point of the realistic from a different angle.
Yeah.
Like, what about like the prevalence of like monopolies without government intervention?
I talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I suggested, first of all, that monopoly may not be a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, that there are circumstances in which monopolies arise that is sort of part of the process, and that's good. Like Google has a monopoly on search, and they charge you a fortune to use it, right?
Yeah, but what about when it like curtails like innovation, for example, like that?
Yeah, it could be, but
Then that would be
the problem is if you let government in the door, all kinds of bad things happen. So the question is there a problem like that you've identified?
But that would still be a source of market failure.
Sorry?
Right? That would still be a source of market failure, right?
Not a market failure, it would be a problem. We said market failure doesn't exist in reality. You remember what market failure is? That's what I was talking about. So it doesn't exist.
But what are the antitrust laws for if not to?
They are to provide employment to a huge number of government officials.
Okay. And they don't cure against monopoly or its drawbacks.
I think the people who want action against monopoly aren't very happy with what they do. And the people who don't want action against monopoly aren't happy either. So, no. Yeah. The reason government does things, usually it's to benefit government. Shock, they're human. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even accepting that an unimpeded market is the most efficient way to
Yeah.
allocate certain resources, isn't in some cases the question whether those resources ought to be distributed at all, like say heroin, lead paint. Can the government not make the legitimate argument that we don't want these resources distributed or just to certain people?
Sure. There's nothing, no objection in principle to that. I don't think. Yeah. Well, talking to Russ, I don't think that there are no cases in which some sort of government action is justified. However badly government does, given all the things that I said, it still may be the best alternative that government does something because it won't otherwise be done. Yeah, but that's the unusual case. Okay, to automatically assume that that's true is just wrong. Okay, sometimes it'll be true. Yeah. Okay, last question. Okay.
Would it be more accurate, or is neither of these accurate, to say Professor Meir Kohn is a libertarian, or would it be more accurate to say Professor Meir Kohn is an anarchist?
And those are your only two choices.
No, you get to reject them both.
I'm not a doctrinaire or anything. I mean, I have a talk on how it's not in this series, about how I became a libertarian. And the gist of it is, it wasn't because I read Ayn Rand or something like that. It was just my experiences, actual experiences, things I did, things I learned. I got to be very skeptical about the value of government. So I'm a libertarian, and I'm a small government libertarian. Okay, and it's empirical. It's not based on any theory. Okay.
Common sense libertarian.
Sorry?
You're a common sense
Common sense
libertarian.
libertarian. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
One last question? over
Last question. Okay.
Yeah, last question. I mainly agree with all your points and this
Yes.
like minarchism thing of a minimal state.
Yes.
Many of your points seem
Yes.
very similar to what Nozick says on
Yeah.
anarchy state in utopia. And my question is, if agents on the economy are trying to maximize productivity or making money basically,
Yes.
where does this leave all the people that have maybe disabilities or people that cannot be on the labor force? And
There's one of the books that I do in my reading groups called The Welfare State We're In, which sort of asks that question. And what they do is very sensible. What the author does, he says, okay, government is doing these things, but that's very recent. What did it look like before? What did healthcare look like before? Did poor people have no healthcare before the government intervened? And he studies that. And he says, not only did they have healthcare, they had much better healthcare before the government intervened. So the system was, if you were a doctor, distinguished doctor, you would have your paying patients in the afternoons, and in the mornings you'd go and be a doctor at the hospital, pro bono. You wouldn't charge for that. So the poor people would get free healthcare at the hospital, okay, from the best doctors. Which was a lot better than what happens under the National Health Service. Is what
what did you say that many of these functions were actually taken, for example, by higher standards of charge, for example? So there was like this, I don't know the name in English, but it was basically a 10% tax that every citizen on the kingdom paid.
Yeah.
And it was precisely to fund this kind of stuff, which is kind of a state.
Yeah, that's the state. But I'm saying there's also an alternative, which is philanthropy. Okay, people, again, Smith is big on this, okay? People care about other people, okay? It's not the model of economic man that, that we see in economics. So it was, before the government didn't do, it wasn't, the idea that government is here to solve our problems is a very recent idea, 20th century.
No, I completely agree with it.
So people were taken care of before, and arguably better.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. Would you consider that if that didn't happen, and you didn't have this philanthropy on the agents of your economy, would that be an anarchy figure?
It's not I mean, there's more to us than the market, is what I'm telling you. Okay, if you look at humans, yes, they're active in the market, but that's not everything. Ask Adam Smith.
On that note, thank you very much, Meir, for your talk. Thank you very much.
Welcome.